Hello, my name is Lynn Festa, and I'm excited to spend the next minutes with you to talk about using self-care strategies to boost resilience using concepts from the Daring Way and positive psychology. I'm the owner of Health Professional Coaching, LLC, and I'm thrilled to be a part of this summit. This is just a short bio of who I am and how I got here. And I started actually as an occupational therapist back in 1988. And through this and that, I found myself the owner of Health Professional Coaching, using all of these skills to bring promoting wellness for healthcare professionals. I actually work with other people besides healthcare professionals. I like to say I work with the helping professionals, anybody that would like to serve and make this world a better place. The one thing that I'd actually like to point out at the bottom, which is a little bit, I think, unique to some of the services that I offer, is that I'm a highly sensitive person, knowledgeable professional. And there at the bottom is the website to this. And if you find that you're maybe just having a little bit more difficulty than the average bear, and you find yourself being a little bit more anxious, and how could you not be in this time? Check out thehspperson.com. Now, I want to cover a lot of things, so I'm going to hide my face here. Well, yes, this is why we're all here. We are in unprecedented times. I think we've all established that. And this is where our lives were just kind of trotting along with the usual problems. And all of a sudden, it's not. So this has really been upended. So the tools that I'm going to use are for that kind of approach. We're all having a calm, rational breakdown right now. And what I would like to focus on for the next duration of my webinar is what I call beyond the obvious hand washing. We should absolutely be getting out in nature walks. And I've actually started telling some of my clients, I don't care if it's raining. That's what a raincoat is for. Get out and get fresh air. Contact friends. I think we've all, I hope, have been contacting and reconnecting with people. Sleep if you can. Insomnia is one of the big things that seems to be striking people. So try to get the much sleep as you can. Naps are highly encouraged. The one that I also want to encourage at the bottom is if you're not somebody who does an active meditation practice, but you'd like to start. Currently, Deepak, I always call him Dopra, Deepak Chopra and Oprah are doing a meditation for free. So I would actually check that out. It's called Hope in Uncertain Times. So on a good day, meaning pre the world imploding around us, there is a strong negativity bias anyway, and that's just how we're wired, for better or for worse. Some of us a little bit more, some of us a little bit less, but there is definitely a strong science behind what's called the negativity bias. And that is actually, sorry about this number, but for every 12 negative things, there's one thing that your brain will actually acknowledge. So unfortunately, that is how we're wired. We're going to be Teflon for the positive and Velcro for the negative. And then what we're trying to do is rewire things. So definition of self-care. I think I like to let people know that I'm an occupational therapist back from the 80s. When we thought of self-care back when I started a few years ago, right? Is self-care was more like what we talked about, like tying your shoes and taking a shower independently. And fast forward 35 years, and self-care has definitely taken on a new definition. For better, for worse, I think it's really positive, but sometimes I think we really want to dig down and talk about what self-care really means. And what I love from the English Oxford Dictionary, it talks about somebody taking an active role in protecting your well-being. And what I love from the World Health Organization, which we are hearing a few things on a daily basis from, so we're all, for better for worse, familiar with that World Health Organization, is that it is a deliberate action. action as a verb that we all can take to maintain our good health. Another word that's really jumped up, especially in my coaching world, which I really appreciate, is the concept of resilience. And what I love about this too is the American Psychology Association 6 years ago talked about it's a process, and that's the key word here, of adapting to trauma threats and, as we are in now, significant sources of stress. There's a wonderful resource that I hope people can check out. It's called the Greater Good Science Center. It's out of Berkeley, and they are doing, it's a significant amount of positive psychology studies that are very robust, very valid and reliable for those people who know what those, how we want our studies to be. But what I love is about how we're handling adversities, and also it's about recovering from a lot of these setbacks. For those of you born at a certain age, on the right side of the screen is something called a Weeble Wobble. And they were actually invented in 1971. And what they did, for those of you not familiar, but please look them up because they're really brilliant, is there are these plastic objects, I guess, but they're round, as you can see, and they're weighted at the bottom. And what you want to do is you go and you would push them as hard as you could. And you would push and push, and this would wobble around. But actually what the best part is that Weeble would always come back up. And I think what a wonderful metaphor for what resilience is, and how we're going to get pushed around, but we're going to end up standing tall. So the very brief, watered down, because we want to do a lot of stuff here today, is resilience isn't not what happens to us, because Lord knows there's a lot of stuff going on. It's our response to it. And in a wonderful, easy world, as in 2 weeks ago, what you wanted to do is keep your response back to normal. Within 2 to 20 minutes was the goal. And you know that your response is actually back to a normal response when you can get your heart rate back to 100 beats per minute. Now, anybody can learn resilience. Anybody can develop this. It is a muscle. There is some literature out there, and I'm not really sure about this, but I like it anyway, is that it does take 7,000 hours to really build your resilience up to the level that's adaptable. I'm just saying that we're all getting extra credit for everything that's happening now, and we are building our resilience faster than we can almost keep up with it. So some of this work, when I'll dive into in a minute, is the work of Kristin Neff in self-compassion. And I love that this has really come to the forefront in the last few weeks, because I think it's incredibly important. I was first introduced to this work when I was getting my certification in Brené Brown's work, The Daring Way, which we'll dive into in a minute. But I thought this was important to bring up, because there I was doing the work of Brené Brown, and she made a big point of introducing the work of self-compassion, and we use it when we are using the Daring Way. And there's 3 main things that Kristin Neff talks about, and I put her website up there too, so if you want to do a deeper dive into this, please check it out. The first one is really driven home, I think, and it's what we call common humanity versus isolation. And that's more psychological isolation. But common humanity is we are not the only ones going through this. And that we, again, this has been made very obvious to us in the last couple of weeks, is that sometimes you will go through something and think, oh my God, nobody else has ever done this. Nobody else has experienced this awful situation. I'm alone. And actually it's not. There is a strong common humanity in that we are all in this together. Kindness. So again, put in the words self before this. So self-kindness is talking to yourself like you would a friend. So I like to use the example of you used a lot of negative self-talk, and switch it and think that if that was your friend talking to you like that with air quotes, would you keep that person as a friend? I hope not. So it's reminding yourself to talk to yourself like you would a good friend. Mindfulness is really, and just again, just to kind of go through this, is being in the here and now and not over identifying with the past. And right now, especially not over identifying with the future, is really being in the here and now. I like using the work of self-compassion because I'm really into understanding the science behind things. And I think that really connects for me. But what the biggest thing that this will do is lower the stress hormone of cortisol. Now, normally cortisol, brief thing on cortisol, is that it's the fight or flight, freeze, and sometimes I've heard briefly that somebody said faint, which I actually think is maybe not a bad idea in some situations. But what that'll do is the fight or flight, and our cortisol goes up. And that's a normal thing to happen. What's happening, especially in the situation that we're all in now, is our stress hormones are staying too high. What that will do is actually start to have an effect on our immune systems and everything else. So the more you can practice that self-compassion, really double down on that, you are starting to bring that stress hormone down to a normal level. And then again, that's building your resilience by the bottom line, which I love, by your moderating your reactions. When normally you would go down the train of the thought, catch yourself and be like, no, actually, I'm going to talk to myself like I would a friend. I do want to spend some minutes really diving into the work of Brene Brown. And she has a concept called big. If you're going to live big, one of the most important ingredients you need is courage. So I'm all going to ask you to get out that red bow or those ruby slippers and start working them, because the more you can practice courage, the more you can live big. And what I love about this is obviously all of these, but number 5, I actually think is really important to emphasize in this context, is that we all reach out for support and we all speak the truth about what we're actually feeling. Boundary setting. And again, I think what I really wanted to include the big concept into this webinar is because all of this will be tested a little bit more. And when you start to set a boundary, especially if you're somebody that's not your strong suit, it's going to take that courage. And I promise you it's going to take some practice. And what the bottom line of boundary setting is that you're willing to use no as a complete sentence. I promise you that when you start to set a boundary, it will feel very strange in your body. You also may get what Martha Beck talks about is a, hey, wait a minute, change back. I always can walk all over you. What do you mean you're telling me no without apologizing? So be ready for that if you're new to that, and know that if you're starting to feel that, then you're on the right track. The best part, I think, about really doubling down on boundary setting is that when it's a practice of self-care, it's a way of taking your power back. When a boundary has been crossed, and again, when you start to notice like, wait a minute, you actually, one of the first things you'll feel, and this goes a little woo-woo, is that you'll start to feel it in your body first before you acknowledge it in your brain. And then you're going to find a little bit like you're a little pissed off and a little bit, quote, taken advantage of. And that's a resentment that Dr. Brown talks about. That's like the first thing. The other ones I think are very important if you're starting to blame others or you feel victimized. And I think this is also one that I think is really important, is if you find yourself using the word should, maybe not. Maybe that's where you start to question that maybe you want to set a stronger boundary. And again, wanting to be liked versus respected. I like these because it really brings it home, is, as Dr. Brown says, you respect my boundaries And when you're not clear about what's okay and not okay, you ask. The second one I think also kind of helps is the way that we've been treated, and we've actually been teaching people how to treat us, is when you just permit something and you don't speak up, you're promoting that behavior in that other person, and you're promoting the behavior of how people are going to treat you. The last one is from Martha Beck, and I love this one. I actually, though, highly recommend that you don't say it out loud. I wouldn't say this out loud at work. It could get you fired. And if you're in a heated conversation at home, which we're all spending a lot of time with our loved ones, I would say this one to yourself is also a way to take your power back. But I would probably say this one silently. But I got to tell you, it works every time. So the second part of big is the concept of integrity. And let's go back to the picture of the lion from The Wizard of Oz. You're going to choose the courage to own your story and reach out for support. You're going to speak the truth about what is going on. It is going to be not so easy, especially at the beginning. But what you're going to do is choose what's right over what's fun, fast, or easy. And this is where this is a really good time to double down and know what your values are and start to practice them. I love this quote on the side, because sometimes when you are starting and really living in integrity and being in integrity and choosing the courage, you may feel that you're alone. Please know that you're not. And we will all be out there in that field practicing our social distancing 6 feet apart, but we will meet you there. So generosity, and I give a little bit of a giggle when I talk about that, because when I first started this work, when she came out with big, I thought, oh, generosity, of course, we're all generous. And then I started to figure this out, and I'm like, oh, wait a minute, this may be a little bit harder than I thought. Because it's really from working from assumptions and intentions of compassion. And this is what I like to say is not writing somebody's story until you've actually heard the story. And I think, again, when we're all kind of heightened with all of our cortisol, this one we have to really take a step back and say, wait a minute, let me make sure that I understand the story before I start making up the story. And this, I now like to joke, I'm like, kind of like that 3 a.m. story that you decided that you're going to write in your head about the situation. Go back to sleep, telling yourself, actually, wait a minute, I need to practice generosity. Because there's 2 strong requirements of generosity. And the first one is you need to stay in your own business. And this is actually Byron Katie. Love her work, use it all the time in my coaching. There's no science behind it except the science of it's probably level 5 level of evidence, and that it works every time. But this is a wonderful way to catch yourself. There's 3 kinds of business. There's my business, there's your business, and there's God's business. Right now, I think a wonderful way to explain God's business or the universe's business is the coronavirus. That is God's business. So what we want to do when we find ourselves writing somebody else's story is get the hell out of their business. You have no right to be in their story. And there's no editing without permission. You wait to hear that person's story. While we're practicing generosity, the one thing, again, with so much going on right now and everybody feeling kind of extra, having our normal breakdowns, is, and again, when also question this with the self-compassion, turn this onto yourself too, that they or I am doing the very best that I can with what we've got. And the bottom is a quote from Dare to Lead, that we need to start holding people accountable for what they are actually doing. So let's hold ourselves accountable for what we are actually doing versus what we think or writing somebody else's story. So living big, that you're going to be generous in your assumptions and intentions while being in integrity and being very clear, setting your boundaries about what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. One of the tools that Brene Brown works, and I find this working incredibly well, actually with myself and a lot of the clients that I'm working with right now, is that you actually sit down and you write yourself a permission slip. For those of us being a little bit too hard on ourselves, I, Lynn Festa, give myself permission to take a 20-minute nap every day. You get the story. But actually getting out the permission slip and writing it out and sticking it to your computer for that day is a wonderful way to build resilience. The Four Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz actually came out in 1997. And what I love about this, again, he just wrote this brilliant book, and I think this should go up in every office, is this really just sums up a lot of what now social scientists are proving, is that we don't make assumptions. That's living big. We can't take anything personally. Even when he says in the book, even if somebody has a gun to your head, it's still not about you. And I think the bottom, and remembering doing the best we can with what we have, practicing that self-compassion. Another thing that I think really helps us build resilience and keep us in the here and now, and it's actually a practice of mindfulness, is coming up with a mantra or an affirmation. And it's any word that you can repeat on a consistent basis that kind of catches you from kind of what I call tumbling down that hill. As you can tell, I love my sticky notes. This is actually a snapshot of my desk. And I love my mantras. You can see the ones at the bottom, and I couldn't help myself that now is we can wash our hands as the CDC is our new mantra. I also think that taking those 20 seconds, especially when we're heightened, we're all washing our hands. Although as a healthcare provider too, made me a little nervous. I'm like, weren't we washing our hands before? But I'm glad now we're all washing our hands. But use that time as a mindfulness practice too, as your mantra. I have to say that the current one that I have, as actually my screensaver right now, is just surrender to the moment. So this post-traumatic growth, or also is called benefit finding in the literature. And I'm just going to sneak in here now. The opposite of benefit finding is fault finding. So you can see that this is very strong positive psychology concept that was actually written about by Tedeschi and Calhoun in the 1990s. And it really talks about there is an event or a crisis that happens to somebody. And what happens is through the post-traumatic growth of a situation, that people come out stronger and better than they did before the event or crisis. And we know that this is something that can work and know that this can happen. Keeping an eye on that. So knowing right now in the situation, it's obviously very stressful in the situation, but what we start to do is keep our eyes out for that growth that will happen. What I love about this too is this is actually a wonderful way to build resilience. And what happens when you really focus on that benefit finding, and what I would actually recommend though, when you really start to look for that positive, is you do it without the words at least before how you say it. Because if you can take that out, that takes out some comparative suffering and things like that. It really puts you in the here and now, looking for the benefit. But when you do this, it has been shown to do all of these things that are listed on the right side of the screen. And there is what I love about this is the spiritual growth that will come out of this. Spiritual growth in my work, especially as an occupational therapist, and spiritual growth is really finding meaning and purpose. So what will come out of the situation that we're all in is that somewhere down the line, we're going to find the purpose and the meaning behind what we're going through. Okay. Gratitude. I have to include it because it is the most significantly researched within an inch of its life concept in positive psychology that has been shown to work. So when used appropriately, and we'll talk about the ways to do that without overdoing it. Sometimes we tend to just like think more is better, is that there is a positive outcome that comes from an external force. So this is very extrinsic. There is strong neuroscience of gratitude. It will actually change how your brain functions. It will go and has been shown to actually decrease that cortisol, which I talked about earlier, and it will increase the dopamine and oxytocin levels, which is we all can use more of right now. So gratitude, think of it actually, this is a wonderful coping response to what is going on. Again, that will increase our resilience. Okay, I actually love this slide because I love the fact that everyone says that's too busy. And I always say that's too bad because I want to drive home the fact of how much of an impact and how strongly, again, research gratitude is. The one at the bottom actually is the one I hold out the most hope for, is that it reduces hedonic adaptation. My post-traumatic growth is that we all come out of this somehow a little bit happier, with a little bit more well-being, and that we actually elevate that. We don't go back to our previous level of happiness. Unless you were like totally happy and all that, then you go back to that. That's great. But for the rest of us, I hope that by practicing the gratitude and the post-traumatic growth that will come out of the situation that we're in, is that we come out healthier. There are ways to show gratitude. You can do a gratitude wall if you're at work, or if you just have a whiteboard at home too. And actually the work of Sonia Lubomirsky talks about actually 1 to 2 times a week is actually more effective than daily. If you actually want to give yourself a what called a 30-day challenge to get yourself started, you write 3 things every day. Again, that'll actually help for those of us having trouble sleeping, which is probably most of us right now. The one that I really like to talk about too is the one at the bottom, especially if we find ourselves with time on our hand and maybe we want to increase our dopamine, is sit down and write a gratitude letter. Actually, an old-fashioned letter is probably the best way to do it because some of it actually goes to get in the mail, which for some of us is the excitement of the day right now. And go back as far as you can, 20, 30 years, or last week, of course, if something happened last week that you want to show gratitude for. But it will actually have an effect on your prefrontal cortex, and the person who gets the gratitude letter also gets those benefits. So in conclusion, I love to do this bonus exercise, and it actually is a form of everything that we've talked about. So we're all getting triggered by certain things, and we all may be not living as big as we should. But every time that you find yourself in a situation where something happens and you're kind of like triggered by it or you're pissed, instead of increasing your cortisol, you give yourself a point. And depending on how big the situation is, you can get 1 to 3 points. And by doing that, you're going to try to get to 20 points within a certain amount of time. So if you do, when you get to those 20 points, that you can get yourself a reward that you may or may not have done. Now, at this point in our lives too, maybe it's buy the gift certificate to the store that's actually just online now. And that's a way to pay it forward. Just an idea too, but make it a reward that you need. Now you can hear the kind of but in my voice. There's something in the Buddha called the second dart. And that's that snarky remark that you come back with. If you do that, if you throw the second dart, you have to take some points away. You just don't get to keep all your points with that second dart. So it kind of keeps you in training to build your resilience and really keep your cortisol down. It actually works really great if you can do it with a friend, and just text people at this point too and say, just got 2 more points. Or, oh my God, you have to take 3 away from me or something. But this really helps actually decreasing that cortisol. Here are some references, because I believe in references. Just like to say, I like to pull this together. Thank you for your time. I hoped, my goal is that if everybody can just get one thing out of all of our talks, then we've made the world a better place, which is what we're all here to do anyway. Please reach out. I'd love to hear from you, and you can see where the different places to reach me. Again, may you all be well. May you be safe. May you live in joy and peace. Take care, everybody.